only if. So how many linear functions do we have? Little bit more than that. So we have as many as a's. Okay, so we have 2 to the n linear functions. Okay, how many Boolean functions? So we have to decide either 0 or 1 for each of the 2 to the n vectors. So it's 2 to the 2 to the n. Okay. So what do I mean by that is that we have very few linear functions among all the Boolean functions. Okay. So basically, intuitively, we expect the linear functions to be far apart from each other. Okay. And this is indeed the case. This is indeed the case. Because lemma, if f different from g and f and g are linear, then f is the probability where R is chosen randomly, X is chosen randomly in 0, 1, that f of x different from g of x is 1/2. Okay? They differ on at least half of the inputs. Why is it so? So basically, what happens is that f different from g, it's the same as saying that f minus g is not the 0 function. This is a linear form. Okay, this is a linear function, f minus g. F and g are linear, so f minus g also. Okay, so what can I say about f minus g is non-zero, so the rank of f minus g is 1. Okay? So the dimension of the kernel of f minus g is n minus 1. So what does this mean? This means that the number of x such that f of x equals g of x is 2 to the dimension 2 to the n minus 1. That is to say, half of the total space. Okay? So if f is different from g, you have plenty of certificates that f is different from g. You have at least half of them. Half of the inputs, they will differ on at least half of the input. Okay? So we are in the same situation as before. Okay? We have plenty of certificates. So okay, so now this is really good news, because basically what does this mean? This means that if you imagine that these are linear functions, okay, they are at distance at least 1/2 from each other somehow, okay? So basically, if you ever see a function f that is within a distance less than 1/4 of a linear function, then f, if it was to be a linear function, it has to be this one. It cannot be any other, okay? Because it's further away from any other linear function. Okay? So this drawing has no sense, okay? It's just a drawing to see the picture, okay? But since you know that this is larger than 1/2, if you are within the cone around at 1/4 around a linear function, there is only one linear function to which we can connect to. Okay? And now the question is, if it is the case that f is really close from one linear function, can we reconstruct this linear function? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes, we can reconstruct this linear function. So any clue on how to do that? Uh-huh. So if it's at distance 1/4, it's not that close. It's this means that it will be correct only on 1/4 of input. Okay. So the key here to do that, I think it's one of the most. I think it's the most beautiful result in computer science, to my point of view, is the fact that when the thing you're trying to compute is structured, then you can debug a buggy program. Okay? So let me give you an example with something. Imagine that you have a program A, okay, that given two integers in the set 0, big N minus 1, is supposed to output x times y modulo n. Okay? So you know that in computers, you have the integers are coded into some finite field, okay? So z to max int, okay? N is max int, okay? And you have a multiplier here, okay? But you know, this multiplier might be buggy, okay? There might have some bug. So what is a bug? A bug in a program is something that you don't know where it is, okay? If you knew where it is, you would have fixed it, okay? So if you see your program here as you have x here and y is there, okay? Basically, what does this mean? This means that there are some pairs of x and y's where the program will output something crazy, okay? It's a bug, okay? Again, if you knew where it was, you would just erase it, okay? You could simulate your program and correct it. It's very easy to correct that, okay? But you don't know where it is, okay? So this happened once for the division. I don't know if you've heard about the Pentium bugs, okay? They just went a little bit too fast to design their chip, and they designed a chip that was doing, in some cases, there was a very few number of pairs of integers where the output was not the division of y by x, okay? So this happens, okay? And it costs a lot to Intel. So let's imagine that we are in a situation where the program has been tested, okay? And the number of bugs, okay? The number of bugs is less than 10%, okay? Which is already huge, okay? But it's less than 10%. So the problem is that if you ever fall on a pair x and y where the multiplication is not correct, you have no way to verify it, okay? There's a priori, you're screwed, okay? You just have an answer, but if you had another multiplier that was correct, you would use it, okay? So you just have your program, and you know that it might be buggy, okay? You cannot trust the output. You know that you can trust it up to 90%, but you know that for 90% of the input, then the output will be correct. Okay, so now, how do you fix that? How do you fix that? And there is a way to fix it. And to me, it's a very beautiful thing. Okay, you have a black box. Okay, the algorithm is a complete black box, and you will fix that. How do you proceed? You use randomness. How do you proceed? You just, instead of computing a of x and y, you do the following. First, you draw two random numbers independently, R and S, in 0 and minus 1. Okay, you draw R and S uniformly at random. Good. And second, you output A of x plus R y plus S minus A of R y plus S minus A of x plus R S plus A of RS. Okay? So in order to debug your program, which is buggy, you will call it 4 times. It will be better. Why? Why? Because these inputs here are not random, in the sense that they are really random. I mean, they are not arbitrary. The idea is that basically the fact is that multiplication is random self-reducible. This means that if you know how to compute the multiplication on random instance, on random inputs, you know how to compute it on arbitrary inputs. Why? Because of that. Because what? What is the value of that if all the computation goes okay? The value of the first term is x plus r times y plus s. If everything goes okay, the second is r times y plus s. Okay? The following is x plus r times y. And the last one is r times s. So what's going on? It's plus. Here is that if you expand everything, this is xy plus ry plus sx plus sr. This is ry plus, well, I don't need to expand that. So now, what's going on is that this ry will cancel this one. This xy, this is bad, times s, sorry. This xs will cancel this one. This rs will cancel this one, and this rs will cancel this one. Okay, and what remains is what we expect, x times y. Okay, so now what is the chance that this computation goes right? It will go right if this one goes right, and this one goes right, and this one goes right, and this one goes right. Okay, so now what's going on here? The inputs are not arbitrary. They are chosen in such a way that it's always random uniform. Why is it so? It's simply that you use the following lemma. That says that if you translate a uniform random variable, then you get a random uniform variable. Okay, this is completely trivial. Lemma. Take a J, a group, okay, and U, a uniform random variable over G, and wait, why do I need to change the color? And X, an arbitrary well, let's do it simple. Okay, U, a uniform random variable over G, then for all G in the group, G plus G times U. So let's write plus the operation in the group. Okay, G times U is a uniform random variable. Over G. So why is it the case? It's trivial. It's the probability that G times U equals Y for some Y, for all Y in G. Okay, the probability that G times U equals Y is equal to the probability that U equals G minus 1Y, which is 1 over the size of the group. Okay? So if you translate a uniform random variable, you get a uniform random variable. So what is x plus r, y plus s? It's the translation of a uniform random variable rs by the vector xy. Okay, so it's uniform. So the probability of failure is less than 10%. R, y plus s is the translation of rs by 0y. So again, the probability of failure, it's not independent, but the probability of failure is less than 10%. Okay? Again, this is the translation by x0 of the same variable. The probability of failure is less than 10%. Here, the probability of failure is less than 10% because it's uniform. So globally, what is the probability of failure of this algorithm? It's less than 40% by the union bound. Okay? So it was 10%, now it's 40. This is bad. No, this is not bad. Because now it works for any input, even the buggy ones. Okay? For any inputs, I will get the right answer with probability 60%. And I can amplify that. Okay, I just repeat and take the majority of the value. And I can get it as close as I want. Okay? Another way to make sure that we are correct is just to compare it to A of xy. If the results differ, we have found a bug, which is a good news. We can improve our program. Okay? And if they don't differ, then there is a good chance that it's correct. Okay? So this is, I think it's very beautiful, and it works for many things like Fourier transform, matrix multiplication, whatever. Okay? A lot of problems are just random self-reducible. So another thing is that random self-reducible means that if you know how to solve the average case, you know how to solve the worst case. Okay? So that's how you prove that worst case complexity, average case complexity. Okay? You can prove that problems are hard on average also. Because if they are hard in the worst case, then they are hard on average also. Because if they were not hard on average, then you could solve the worst case. Okay? So that's how you connect worst case instance to average case instance. Okay? So you have a very beautiful thing. So now we have this buggy f. Okay? And we want to find what linear function it is close to. So we know that it's close to some linear function. Okay? Because I will explain it to you afterwards, how to prove that. And now we want to recover this linear function. Okay? So any clue on how to do that? So it's very much the same algorithm as we've just seen. So let's say I want to compute. So I know that f is close enough to some linear function. Let's say that it's at distance, it's 1,4 close. Let's say rho close with rho less than 1,4. That means that they agree on, no, it's the opposite. It's 1 minus rho close. They agree on at least 75% of the inputs. Okay. Now I want to recover the linear function that it is close to. So how do I do that? I just do the exact same thing as we did before. Is that given x, okay, given x, one, draw a random vector y in 0, 1 to the n, okay, and 2, output, what do I output? F of x plus y, which will be correct with probability 75%. plus f of y. Okay? X plus y, for the same reason as above, is uniform. So this will be the linear function that we want with probability. This will be f tilde. So we want to recover some linear function f tilde. Okay, f tilde. So this will be f with, this will be f with probability at least 3/4, at least 1 minus rho. Okay. This will be f tilde of y with probability at least 1 minus rho. So this will fail with probability at most rho. This will fail with probability at most rho. So this will be correct. So this will be f of f tilde of x with probability at least 1 minus 2 rho. Okay, which is more than 1/2. Okay. So I have recovered the linear function that is encoded in this function. Okay. So the important thing is that, you know, this f that was given to me was, we were asked the question, okay, I'm claiming that it's a linear function, trust me. Okay, you don't trust it. Okay, first you check, that's what we will do. We will check that it's close to a linear function. Okay, and when you know that it's closed, then you don't even trust again, okay, because you know that it's just close to it. Okay, but you can recover the correct value. Okay, with good probability. Okay, so why is it important for me to do so? Is that linear functions are a very, very, very efficient way to encode buggy informations, because they are structured in such a way that it's really easy to check things on that. Okay, and that's the key to the PCP theorem, for instance. Okay, and that's the key to many things. Okay, and I'll talk about that later, but later on in another lecture. Okay, today we will just take the do the linearity testing thing. Okay, and do the self-correction. But the idea is that if you want to make sure that the people did not cheat you when they told you, okay, I have the solution, you can trust me, you don't trust them. Okay, you say, okay, first, you express me this solution as a linear function. Okay, then I will be able to check with constant probability that it's indeed close to a linear function. And then I will be able to recover the linear function that it is supposed to encode there and do some checking on that. Okay, that's the way it works. Okay, when you want to verify, what's the key here? What's the key here is that basically how many calls to f did we do? In order to recover the correct value, we just made 2 calls. Okay, the complete spirit of the thing is, are we able to do this thing by probing the value of f only a constant number of times? And the answer is yes, because I can, as we will see, we can check that the function is close to a linear function with a constant number of probes, and I can recover the linear function with a constant number of probes. Okay? And because of that, I will be able to check a solution of length n with a constant number of probes. Okay? And that's the whole spirit of the PCP theorem. So does it speak to you when I talk about the PCP theorem? Okay. Okay. So PCP theorem says the following thing. It says that NP is equal to PCP of log n1. What is PCP? PCP of RQ is the set of languages, okay, such that there exists a polynomial time Turing machine, V, okay, such that one V uses theta of R random bits. Okay, you're not allowed to use too many random bits. Okay. 2 V probes only theta of Q bits of Y. Okay, you're allowed to read only Q position in Y. You compute this position using your the input string X and the random bits, and you ask them to Y, okay, I want to know this one, this one, this one, this one. Okay? And then you do the output, and the output must verify two things. If X belongs to the language, then there exists a proof Y such that the probability that the verifier outputs 1 is 1. Okay? If the word is in the language, then there is a proof Y such that when I look at these Q bits of Y, I will always answer 1. Okay? And 4, if X does not belong to the language, then whatever the proof is, the probability that the verifier outputs 1 is less than 1/2. Okay? That means that when I will test, when X is not in the language, there is no way that when I just read this constant number of nodes, okay, this Q is theta of 1, okay, I can just decide that no, X, this is not in NP. I won't say that X belongs to L. So what does this mean in human words? This means that in NP, you can check the certificate just by probing a constant number of positions in the proof. Okay, and with that, so a concrete case is okay. You're grading an exam. Okay, you just check a few number of random letters in the copy of your student, and you have his grade. Okay, so it's even funnier than that. The best result is Q equal 3. You cannot go below 3. Okay, and you ask for X, Y, Z, 3 bits of the proof. Okay, Y is a bad idea. So let's say you ask for, you just read 3 positions in the proof. Okay, and you output the sum. Okay, so this is really easy to grade a student. Okay, because NP is the only thing that they can even write. Okay, because it has to be polynomial length. Okay, so you pick 3 bits, 3 random letters in the proof in their copy. You just sum up and you have a grade. That's really an impressive theorem. Okay, so you just need a constant number of probes. So why do we care about this PCP theorem? We care about this PCP theorem because telling that it's exactly equivalent to tell that there exist some problems that cannot be approximated up to some constant, C, unless P equals NP. Okay? So what I want to tell you now is that basically what we were doing linearity testing, okay, it's property testing. Okay, it's something that has really to do with checking that the property is right. Okay, there is self-correction. Okay, the question is now I want to correct my program, my Buggy program. So it's related to having trustable algorithms. Okay, so you want to fix a program. You are running a big industrial project. You don't trust what has been done. You try to make sure to add some part to your program in order to correct the bugs in case something goes wrong. Okay, so it's safety procedures somehow. Okay, so we have complexity property testing, which is checking that your program does the correct thing. You have it's related to correcting a buggy program. It's related to complexity theory things. Okay, you want to express NP as something, and it's related to algorithms. Okay. So what I want to tell you, it's basically the whole spirit of this lecture is that randomness is connecting various parts of computer science that have a priori nothing to do with each other, but that are really doing the same thing. That's no randomness, that the same people are in complexity theory, in property checking, in cryptography, in algorithms. Okay, these are all working in this area. Okay. So why is it? What is the connection between these two things? Okay, PCP is all about writing a convincing proof. Okay, you want to write a Y that you can be convinced that it's correct just by probing a few positions in the proof. Okay, it's all about that. Okay, it's about writing a correct way to write proofs that can be easily read somehow. Okay, easily checked rather than read. Okay, easily checked. Okay. So what is the connection with approximating with algorithms? The connection is the following. How many times do I have? Ooh, okay, good. The connection is the following. What do we say? What do we say when we say that SAT is NP-hard? We say that we can take any language L in LP, okay, and send is no instance the answer where the inputs where the answer the X that do not belongs to the language. Okay, the case where the answer is no. So if you look at SAT like that, and SAT, it's a Boolean function phi of x, which is an end of M close. Okay, you have an end of M close. Okay, and so phi is satisfiable if and only if you can satisfy all the clause Cj simultaneously with the same variables y. Okay, and phi does not belong to SAT. It's not satisfiable if whatever the value of x1, xi, x1, they're always they're at most m-1 clause that can be satisfied simultaneously. Okay? So basically, if you look at the number of clauses that you can satisfy simultaneously, what does the NP hardness proof of SAT show is that you can send any input x that belongs to the language to a formula phi I where you satisfy all the clauses. Okay? And you can send all the x that do not belongs to L in polynomial time to the place where you will satisfy at most M. So basically what you've created here is what we call a gap. Okay? The only thing that you can access from your program is either being above m, close, or below m minus 1. Okay, so it's a very, very tiny gap. Okay, in fact, there is nothing in this gap. Okay, so it's not interesting. But the spirit is that you've created a gap. Okay, so what does this gap show? It shows you that there is no 1 minus 1 over m plus epsilon approximation for max set. Okay, for all epsilon. Unless P equals NP. Why is it so? It's because if you had such an approximation, okay, when your formula phi is satisfied, then it would output that the output of your algorithm A over phi, which is satisfiable, has to be larger than 1 minus 1 over m plus epsilon times the optimum, which is m. Okay? And this is strictly larger than m minus 1. And since it has to be an integer, it's m. Okay? And if phi is not satisfiable, whatever how hard your algorithm tries, it cannot satisfy everybody. Okay? So running your algorithm would tell you whether phi is satisfiable or not. Okay? It would output m or m minus 1. And this makes no sense. Okay? So and then you would solve that. Okay? So you have introduced a gap. So what does the PCP, how does the new proof of the PCP theorem works? Is that it's only okay. It shows that basically this gap can be amplified. Okay, so I don't know whether we will be able to prove that, okay, within this lecture or give some hints, but that's basically the spirit, is that you will manage to amplify this gap and send always all the yes instance to a satisfiable formula, and all to the no instance here, you will be able to send them to below some absolute constant c times m, where c is strictly less than 1. Okay? So that's the spirit of it. Okay? We will be able to show that. That's basically the PCP theorem. So what is the connection with that? Okay? So this implies that there is no C approximation for maxat. If there was, then you would be able to distinguish between that and that. Okay? And then you would be able to distinguish between that and P equals NP. Okay? So now, what is the connection between the green thing there and the green thing there? Here. Okay? The connection is the following. The problem, so clearly, PCP of log n1 is included in NP. Why is it so clear? That's a good question. Why is it so clear? Is that when R is theta of log n, how many random choice do I have? I have 2 to the R random choice possible, which is n to some constant. Okay? So I can try all the random strings in polynomial time. Okay? So I try all the random strings. I ask to read each time all the y's. Okay? And I can compute this probability. Because I try all the random string. Okay? So I can say, okay, what is the answer of W for this random string? What is the answer of V for this random string, etc., etc. Okay. This runs in polynomial time because V runs in polynomial time, and I have a polynomial number of random strings. So I can compute this probability in polynomial time. So now I check whether the probability is 1, and then I say, okay, X belongs to L. Or I check that the probability is less than 1/2, and then I say, okay, X does not belong to L. And I get a non-deterministic algorithm where the non-determinism comes from Y. Okay, given a Y, I can decide whether I'm in this situation or this situation. Okay, so I have a correct NP verifier. Okay? So the length of Y, good question. That's a very good question. The length of Y. I'm checking Q position in Y. Okay, Q equals theta of 1. Okay. So how many random strings do I have? I have a polynomial number of random strings. So I will at most check Q times 2 to the R, which is a polynomial in N. So I can just get rid of everything else and just keep these positions in Y. So Y is of length, is polynomial length. Okay. Okay. Good. So we have this sense, it's easy. Okay. This sense is easy. The hard sense is the other one. Okay. The other one is very hard. Okay. It's not that very hard now, but it's still rough. So what is the connection between this inclusion and that gap? The connection is the following. Assume that we are in this situation. Okay? So we will say that we will define the following problem. Gap SAT. Gap SAT of 1C is the following problem. Is given a CNF formula phi, decide whether 1 phi is satisfiable. That means that all the clauses of phi can be satisfied simultaneously. Okay? Or B, at most, C times N clauses of phi can be simultaneously satisfied. Output, whatever. We don't care about the output otherwise. Okay? So we want the algorithm to be able to recognize the case where phi is satisfiable from the case where at most CM clauses of phi are satisfiable. Okay? So GAPSAT is exactly solving this problem. Okay? Deciding whether we are here or there. Okay? We don't care about intermediate case because basically this is exactly the gap. Okay? Nobody is sent there. So we don't care about this part. Okay? So the algorithm is allowed to do whatever at this position. So what we will show, what does this reduction show is that GAPSAT 1C is NP-hard. Because solving GAPSAT 1C allows you to solve any problem in NP. Okay? So basically what we will show now is that this is equivalent to GAPSAT 2. There exists a C less than 1 such that GAPSAT 1C is NP-hard. Alors, with the same reason as I mentioned before, this is equivalent to there exists a C less than 1 such that for all epsilon positive, there does not exist if there exists a C plus epsilon approximation, a polynomial time approximation for maxat, then P equals NP. Okay, so this is what I told you before, is that if we manage to show that GAPSAT, telling that GAPSAT 1C is NP-hard means that you're able to send any yes instance to M and any no instance to C times N. And this implies that if there ever exists a C approximation for this problem, then you can solve any NP-hard problem. Okay? So telling that GAPSAT 1C is NP-hard is strictly the same thing as telling that there is no C approximation for maxat. So is it clear for everybody? Okay. So this is where we want to go. We know that it's equivalent to that, so we check that. So we know that this is clearly true. So now the only thing that we need to check is that. Okay? So how do we do that? So let's start with the easy way. Which is the easy way? The easy way is this one. So if we have this gap reduction here, then I can get a PCP verifier for any NP problem. Okay, so that's the goal. So I take an LP problem. I know that gap 1C is NP-hard. So I have a reduction that sends that send every so if GAPSAT 1C is NP-hard, I have a reduction, a polynomial time reduction that for every L in L, I have a function that to every x gives a formula phi x, such that if x belongs to L, then phi x is satisfiable. Okay? And if x does not belong to L, then at most C times M close of phi x are satisfiable simultaneously. Okay? I am in this situation. Telling that gap 1C is NP-hard tells you that you can reduce any language L to deciding whether a formula phi x is satisfiable or at most Cm of these clauses are satisfiable. Okay, so can you give me a PCP verifier for L now? Any idea? So we want something that if x belongs to L, will output 1 with probability 1. Okay? And if x does not belong to L, will output 1 with some probability, less than 1. So what do? I just do the following. The verifier will be the following. It will say that y, it expects it to be YL, the value of the variable of phi x. Okay? The proof that will be given to try to show that x belongs to L will be the value, some values for of the variable of formula phi x. Okay? And now what it will do? 1, draw a random clause of Vx, and 2. So the clause is C, Cj, okay, around the clause Cj of Vx, output Cj of y. Why does it work? Why does it work? If x belongs to L, Vx is satisfiable. So there exists a y such that every clause is satisfiable. So whatever clause I choose here, the output will be 1. Okay? Now, if x does not belong to L, at most C times M clause of Vx can be satisfied simultaneously. So whatever y do I choose, there is a constant probability that Cj of y belongs to 0, equals to 0. This constant probability is 1 minus C. Okay? So I have a PCP verifier. Okay? So if this, basically what does this mean? This means that creating a gap, okay, somehow, in this problem, is like, you know, allowing to have either no fault in the proof or many fault, okay, and then randomness can pick them up, and that's how you construct your PCP multiplier. So basically, what it does connect is that having a constant number of errors in a proof, okay, is the same as finding an approximation algorithm, okay? Because if you have a good approximation algorithm, then you will be able to spot the proofs, the errors in the proofs. That's basically the idea, okay? So now let's do the other way. So the other way is not much more complicated. It consists to show that if indeed exists a PCP verifier. Oh, by the way, I did not check the parameter of the PCP verifier. So why does this work? Whoops, it's not SAT, it's free SAT, because else it doesn't work. Okay. So it's gap free SAT that I'm looking for. Okay. So why does this work? This works because I draw a random clause. Okay, the number of clauses is polynomial in the size of x. So it just takes me log of the size of x to some power, which is log of the size of x. Okay, so we are log n random bit. We use log n random bit. And how many points of a proof did I use? I used only 3 points. Okay, I've just asked for the value of 3 variables, the 3 variables that were in this clause. Okay, so it's clearly V is a verifier log n 3. Okay, so that's good. So now let's do the opposite way. So the opposite way, and then we will deserve a pause. The opposite way tells what? Tells that if we have a PCP log n1 verifier for any language in NP, then gap free SAT 1C is NP-hard. Okay? So the proof works as follows. Take L in NP. Okay? Let V be its PCP log n1 verifier. So what we have is a polynomial deterministic machine that uses at most theta of log n random bits and check Q points in the proof. Okay, so V uses theta, R equals theta of log n random bits. ask for the value simultaneously, huh? But it doesn't matter. You can ask one after the other. It doesn't change a bit. Ask for the value of q equals theta of 1 positions in y, and output 0 or 1, such that if x belongs to L, there exists a y such that the probability that vxy equals 1 is 1. And if x does not belong to L, then whatever y is, the probability that v of xy equals 0 is less than 1/2. Okay? So that's what we have. So now, how does this work? So let's have a look to y. This is y. Okay? For every value, every random string R, I will check q position in y. Okay? And the output will be some function fr of this position. Okay? This is a Boolean function. It takes q Boolean variables, q Boolean values, okay, and outputs one Boolean value, which is the result of v of xy, given that we use the random string R. Okay? So this is the case for every random string. Okay? Okay, I have a fr for each of them. Okay? Now what's going on? If x belongs to L, then the probability that v of xy outputs 1 is 1. That means that in that case, there exists a y such that for all R, the Boolean function will output 1. Okay? Because the Boolean function here is the value output by v of xy. But in the other case, whatever the proof is, okay, the number of y, the number of R such that fr of 1 yq, so it's not always the same yi's. Huh? It's just to say that f depends on only q variables of y. Okay, it's not these variables depends on fr. Okay, but there are only q of them. Well, okay. Anyway, the number 1 is less than 1/2 times. It's not the number, the proportion of. Well, okay, the proportion of fr. And, yeah, its number is less than 1/2 times 2 to the r. Okay, you have 2 to the r FRs, okay, and only half of them will output 1. Okay? So, what is the situation? What is my formula phi x that I will reduce L to? So what I'm looking for is to prove that gap 3sat 1c is NP-hard. Okay, so I want to reduce any x to a formula phi x such that if x belongs to L, all the clauses will be satisfied. And if x does not belong to L, only a constant number of clauses, constant fraction below 1 of the clauses will be satisfied. So what are my clauses? What is my function phi x? Yeah, exactly. Phi x is simply the end over R of the fr of y. Okay, I use this formula. I can compute it in polynomial time. Why? Because there is a polynomial number of random string. For each of them, I run v. It takes polynomial time. It tells me which are the variables of y on which it depends. Okay, I look at the output. So this is a Boolean function. So I can express it. I can express it as a FreeSat formula of how many clauses. How many clauses do I need to express FR? So the key here is that it depends only on Q variables.